Chapter 27, Sunhee. The cherry trees blossomed all over town. A few days later, the ground looked as if it were covered with pale pink snow as the petals fell and were carried by the wind everywhere. Our rose of Sharon tree grew new leaves too. There were only a few shoots, but it had survived another winter, and Amani and I were delighted. In May, we got Taeil's second letter. Weeks after he'd written it, Abuji said we were lucky to receive it. The war had all but stopped regular mail service. Dear family, I'm sure it will be a surprise to you to hear that after only a few weeks of training, I am being sent to Japan. I can assure you it was just as big a surprise to me. A few of us have been recruited for a special assignment by order of the Emperor. I was chosen because of my previous commitment to the Youth Air Corps. We are to be transported to a new base in Japan. You must understand that I cannot tell you the exact location. We will have further training for our new positions. Please do not worry about me. As always, I will do my utmost to make the whole family proud of me, your son and brother. Once again, Amoni was happy to hear that Taeil was still in training. For my part, I wondered why the letter was so short. It seemed quite straightforward, without any hidden meaning. Probably he had written it in a hurry and hadn't had time to put in a message for me to figure out. One evening, a few days later, I couldn't write in my diary because my pencil had worn down to nothing but a stub. Abuji would have to bring me another one from his school. It annoyed me to miss a day in my diary. I was in Uncle and Taeil's room. I'd taken to using it as kind of a study. I didn't want them to come home to a room with a stale, musty feel of having been empty for a long time. I put my diary back on the shelf and took both of Taeil's letters from the box where I kept them. I loved reading them over and over. I loved knowing that my brother had touched the sheets of paper I was holding. For the 100th time, I wished we'd gotten more letters. Abuji had said they'd probably allow him to write us before he was shipped out for combat, and Amani held on tightly to that idea. It was good not to get a letter from him, she said, because that meant he was safe. Another way the war turned everything inside out. I refolded the first letter, put it carefully back in the box, and studied the second letter yet again. I was curious about Taeil's new assignment. There didn't seem to be any clues, but maybe I'd missed something. A few of us have been recruited for special assignments by order of the Emperor. I was chosen because of my previous commitment to the Youth Air Corps. By order of the Emperor? It seemed strange that he'd write this phrase in a letter. It made him sound like the announcer on Radio Tokyo or the block leader at a neighborhood accounting. Did he mean to sound like that? Why? To remind me of something? What? My previous commitment to the Youth Air Corps. I thought back to those days, not really so long ago, but it felt like years. What had he done when he was in the Youth Air Corps? The airstrip, digging with spades all day long. Perhaps he was being assigned to dig trenches. I didn't know much about war and hardly anything about battles, but I guessed that trenches would probably be dug quite near the front line. I hoped that wasn't Taeil's new assignment. Then again, digging trenches was surely better than being sent to the front line itself. By order of the Emperor, the Youth Air Corps, Emperor Air, Taeil was going to be a kamikaze. He was going to fly an airplane for that unit, the Special Attack Unit. How often I'd heard him use those words. That was the reason for the extra training. Surely, pilots needed a lot of training. And after the training, a mission, a suicide mission. I was so frightened by this idea that I could no longer sit still. I stood and paced around the room. It was crazy. I was crazy. I had to be wrong. I was imagining things. Those words might mean something completely different. No, I was right. It was so like Tail to want to fly an airplane. Maybe he thought that if he was going to die anyway, it might as well happen when he was doing something he wanted to do. But maybe I was wrong. Remember Tomo? Remember Uncle? I'd been so sure and had made a terrible mistake. Don't make a mistake this time. I slipped into the other bedroom and got into bed without either of my parents noticing. If they'd seen me or talked to me, they'd have known something was wrong. I didn't even have to look in the mirror to know that my face was pale and strained. In bed, I lay flat on my back, forcing myself to think. The war is going badly for the Japanese. Tail said so. There are rumors in the street, and the lessons at school. No news of victories anywhere. Not for a long time now. If he's going to be a kamikaze, he'll need a lot of training. The war is almost over. How much longer? Maybe it will end before he gets to fly a mission. That was it. That was the answer. If somehow Tail could be stopped, or at least delayed for a month perhaps, even a week or two, might be long enough. But how? The next day at school, we had bayonet practice and bomb drills, but I was so inattentive and listless that the teacher thought I was ill. She sent me home early in the afternoon. When I walked into the courtyard, Amoni dropped the wet laundry she was holding and rushed over to me. Sunny, what's the matter? Are you all right? Has something happened? I shook my head. I'm fine, Amoni, just tired. But the teacher thought I shouldn't work anymore. She put her hand on my cheek and made me open my mouth so she could look at my throat. Go to bed, she said. I'll bring you some soup. I felt a little guilty going to bed. After all, I wasn't really sick. I should have helped Amani with the laundry, but I needed the quiet time alone to think. After I drank the soup Amani brought me, it wasn't really soup, just the water the vegetables had been boiled in, but we always called it soup. I lay quietly on my mat and waited. When it was nearly time for Abuji to come home, I got up, rolled my sleeping mat, and put it away. Then I combed my hair. I arranged 2 cushions on the floor. Finally, I went to Tail's room and fetched both letters. I sat down on one of the cushions and waited. After a few minutes, I heard Abuji come into the house. I heard him speak briefly with Amani. Then he came into the bedroom. Sunny, you are not in bed? He said. I hope this means you are feeling better. Yes, Abuji, I'm fine, thank you. Would you sit with me for a few minutes? I have something I would like to talk to you about. He slid the door shut and sat down on the other cushion. Please go ahead, he said. I hesitated for a moment. Tail might not approve of what I was about to do, but he'd never said not to tell anyone what I discovered in his letters. Maybe in a way he wanted us to know, all of us. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly. The last of my uncertainty was blown away with that breath. Abuji, before he left, Tail told me he wouldn't be able to write his true thoughts in his letters because they'd be censored. He asked me to read his words carefully so I would be able to figure out what he really meant. Abuji looked thoughtful. So, you believe his letters have messages of importance beyond the actual words? He asked. I smiled a little inside. Abuji was making things easier for me. Yes, the second one especially. I do not know if it's a message he intended to put in or if it was almost accidental on his part. But last night, I understood the letter in a different way. It took me a while to explain everything. I had to go back in time to talk about how fascinated Tail had always been by the kamikaze. Then I showed Abuji the first letter and pointed out the places where I'd uncovered Tail's true thoughts. Finally, I unfolded the second letter and held it out to him. I no longer needed to look at it myself. I'd memorized the whole thing. After he read through it quickly, I revealed my true fear. That Tail's new assignment was kamikaze training. Abuji never once interrupted me. He listened intently to every word. He didn't shake his head or act like I was crazy. I was grateful for that. When I finished, we sat in silence for a few moments. Abuji drew in a long breath and let it out slowly, just as I had before I started talking. Then he said, "Is it your wish that I act on what you have told me? That I do something to prevent your brother from taking part in a mission?" "Abuji, the war may end soon. I thought that if Tail could be delayed, even for a little while, perhaps there would be no need for him to fly a mission at all." Abuji nodded thoughtfully. "Let us say, for the moment, that you were correct about your brother," he said evenly. "Suppose I went to the military authorities. What could I say to them that might have the desired results?" I was ready with an answer to that. It was what I'd been thinking about all day. Still, I spoke slowly, looking down at my hands. "At first, I thought perhaps you could say that he had some illness, some kind of medical condition that would be bad for a pilot. But I don't think that would work. He was already been training for so long. They would know by now that there is nothing wrong with him." I paused. Abuji nodded again, so I went on. "But what if you were to tell them something like the truth? Tell them that Uncle is a resistance worker. They know that already, right? And then Tail admired Uncle greatly, and therefore you think Tail should not be trusted on a mission of such importance. He should be stopped from flying." I turned this plan over in my mind 100 times. It would not be betraying Uncle. I was not asking Abuji to tell a bald-faced lie. And it might save Tail's life. Abuji was quiet for what seemed like a long time. As I waited for him to speak, I suddenly felt exhausted. The sleepless night and the restless day of thinking so hard and now telling my thoughts had left my body limp. At that moment, I didn't think I could even lift my hand. At last, Abuji spoke in his usual calm, even voice. "Well then, I could tell the authorities I believe Tail is not to be trusted. What do you think they would do?" Something in his face made my stomach feel a little squeezy. "They wouldn't want someone like that flying one of their planes, so they would stop him, wouldn't they, Abuji?" Abuji nodded. "And then what?" I stared at him with my mouth open. It wasn't very polite of me, but I was too surprised to control my expression. How could I not have thought of this myself? Abuji answered his own question. They would arrest him. If he were lucky, he would be imprisoned. Otherwise, he didn't need to finish the sentence. I closed my eyes as a terrible fear rose in me. Otherwise, the Japanese would execute him as a traitor. If Tail were not stopped, he would crash his plane and die. If he were stopped, he might die before a firing squad. Abuji raised his hands and rubbed his eyes as if he too were very tired. He spoke with his hands still covering his face. "Sonny, I'm deeply grateful to you for speaking to me about this. I must think about it for a while. I will tell you when I make a decision." He lowered his hands. "Now, if you are feeling well enough, perhaps you could help your mother with dinner." I rose from my seat and went to the door. Before I stepped out, I looked back at him. He was sitting with his hands in his lap, head bowed, shoulders slumped. I closed the door behind me and stood there for a moment, trembling. I had never before seen Abuji look afraid. The next day after school, I waited outside the house for Abuji to come home. I wanted to talk to him before he came inside because I didn't know whether he'd told Amani anything and I had a million questions to ask. Had he gone to the authorities? What had he said to them? What did they say in response? Would Tail be coming home soon? But when he came home, all the questions died in my throat. He looked at me and nodded, his face tired and gentle. Then he shook his head and took me by the hand. So we went inside together. Without a word, he told me what I needed to know. He had given them the information, but he had no idea what they'd do next. We could only wait.